I supported this war, although I normally do not support wars, because I was concerned about the experience of women in Afghanistan almost being under a gender apartheid. What would happen if we left to the women? Ed, who would like to answer that?
That's certainly a tough one. We can't expect to change the culture of Afghanistan, and that's what I think we've been trying to do in talking about constitutions and elections, which obviously just don't work over there, at least as of now. But there's a very, regarding the treatment of women, I think generally we're all quite aware of how that operates, but there's a very searing, I would call it, book by, I think, Ann Jones, called, it's on that list I gave you. It's about an American woman who, during the fighting, has been trying to work with Afghan women. And the story she tells are terribly depressing, and the way she stuck with it was amazing. Because she was really mostly dealing with women who are being imprisoned, which they can happen for almost any reason. But the culture is just not going to grant women equal rights. We should push, of course, for everything to protect them, educate them, guarantee them as much as possible. But that culture, I think, has a bit of a distance to go before it can come any place close to our notion of what a civil society should be.
There are women's groups in Afghanistan who are working for equal rights, and they understand the uphill battle they have given the cultural history. But the ones that I read, at least, their perspectives, say that the first thing that happens is that the foreign forces need to be out of Afghanistan, that this has been a real setback in many ways, even though they resisted the Taliban, the way in which they treated and relegated women, and they are determined to resist the warlords that are operating throughout the country and the fiefdoms and the way in which they treat women. And they understand that it's a long struggle, but this armed invasion has interrupted, from their point of view, their struggle to move their society along toward gender equality. So it's hard because you don't know how much you're hearing is real and how much is this person's perspective or that person's perspective. So you get a lot of different perspectives from Afghan women on the issue. But the one thing to take note of is that the Pentagon did a study about 6 months ago trying to decide what it is that would win the American approval of an extended war in Afghanistan. And the answer came, as you might imagine, the plight of women in Afghanistan. And within 2 months, an Afghan woman was on the front page of the Time magazine. And so, I mean, it's very difficult for two men to sit up here and say what should happen about women in Afghanistan. But I think we need to sort of listen to all the voices coming to us from women in Afghanistan and not accept our own government's telling of their story, but listening to them very carefully and trying to figure out how it is that we leave Afghanistan in a way that leaves them in a better position to struggle for gender equality.
Can I just say one other word? When I was in Afghanistan with the Peace Corps, one of my office staff was quite a modern young woman. You hear about the headscarves and all that. Well, she wore her hair in a wild gypsy fashion. And anyhow, her name was Sima Wali, and she's related to the former king. And Sima, once the Taliban got going, had quickly left Afghanistan and came to the U.S. and, with the help of a foundation, started a woman's interest in Afghanistan RAWA, I forgot what that means, but she's become quite a figure in the whole women's rights program in Afghanistan. And I haven't heard about her lately, but certainly people like her, and I'm sure there's several others, obviously, that people will not give up on improving the condition of women in Afghanistan. It's just going to take some time, and I think be, unfortunately, difficult and maybe even some setbacks.
Virginia, you want to tell people what RAWA
It's the
is?
Revolutionary Afghan Women's Association, and I also had the pleasure of spending several days with a young woman from that organization a couple of years ago, and she was delightful in the work of the organization.
You said you met Sima?
No, I
No,
met
another.
another young woman
Oh.
who, very young woman, whose mother has been part of the organization from the beginning, and she grew up in it. And it just seems to be a very impressive organization.
It's going to be a long, tough fight, I'm afraid.